Good morning. We're just waiting for a few more people to join the call. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more minutes until everyone has joined the call. So about 1 more minute before we will get going here. All right, so I think we're going to get started. Good morning and welcome to our Indigenous education session through the eyes of an elder. This is Margot and I'll be moderating today's call. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that Matrix Solutions is a culturally diverse group of individuals with great respect for the environment and a commitment to the communities in which we work and live. Today, we respectfully acknowledge that the places we work and live are sacred traditional territory of the Woodland, Iroquoian, Plains, Plateau, and Pacific Coast First Nations, and the First Nations of the Mackenzie and Yukon River Basins, the Inuit, Nunangat, and the homeland of the Métis. Before I turn the meeting over, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. This session is being recorded and will be shared internally afterwards. You do not require VPN connection to watch this session, so for a more stable connection, it is recommended that you disconnect from the VPN. Everyone will be on mute for most of today's call to control background noise, and we ask that all questions be saved for the end of the session. So with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Matthew Sutton, our President and CEO, to get us started. Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm pleased and honored to actually be part in this important discussion today. And I'd like to begin by welcoming you all. But most importantly, I'd like to especially extend a warm welcome to our elder, Doreen Healy. Today is our first National Truth and Reconciliation Day, which also corresponds to Orange Shirt Day in Canada. Both events are designed to educate people about the realities of the residential school system and the impacts it's had on Indigenous communities over the century. Today is a chance to honor the lost children and survivors of the residential schools, as well as families and communities that were impacted. I believe companies like ours, Matrix Solutions, plays a very important role in reconciliation. We contribute to the development of respectful and collaborative relationships with Indigenous communities where we work. Today, we collectively learn more about truth and reconciliation from Doreen. Let's consider how we can approach our work with a deeper understanding, and how when we go to work each day, we have an awareness and consciousness about truth and reconciliation. We're making a request from Doreen to transfer wisdom and knowledge to us today. I'd like to begin by making an offering of tobacco to Doreen. Please accept our offer. And if you could proceed with the smudge offering.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I'm just so impressed with what Matrix, your company is doing. And I am so grateful to be here with you guys today. And while I'm getting this smudge ready, for those who may not be very aware, not familiar with the smudge, just a quick explanation as to what it's for. People get confused and think that it's a religious action that we do. It's our ancestors have been using the smudge way back, and we use the smudge to open or to start any kind of ceremony, any meeting, or any kind of activity, and that's to cleanse the area, our minds, our body, and our souls, and so that we have a clean, fresh start to whatever we're going to do. So this is what I'll be doing for our session, so that we all have a cleansing, and we ask the Creator with the prayer to cleanse our minds, our hearts, and our souls, so that we listen with an open heart with the information that I'll be sharing. And if there are any questions at the end, I'll be more than happy to answer. The in the prayer, well, and also if someone is uncomfortable participating in the smudge, please don't feel you have to sit through it. We never force anyone to sit through, to participate in anything that we do. It's all, everyone feels comfortable, please. And also if you want to say your own prayer in your own way. So in the smudged, I'll be saying the prayer in Blackfoot, my own language. And I'll be asking the Creator for his blessings today, that we have a good session. Blessings for everyone in the room and their families. Blessings to give us the strength to continue the good work everyone does when it comes to working as equals with Indigenous communities. And we ask his guidance as we go down the path of reconciliation, that we do it with an open heart, open mind. We ask special blessings for all the elders, the youth, the newborn, and all the people, especially for people who are sick and suffering, and the homeless, and who are hungry, that we ask for some freedom from their situations. And after the session, we'll ask him to continue to protect all of us, our families, all our loved ones from this pandemic. Nakita Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Before we jump into the actual presentation, I would like to introduce Doreen more formally in terms of her background. And Doreen, if you'll forgive me, your background is rather extensive, so I will have to read some of it.
Yeah, no problem.
So Doreen was born and raised on the Blood Reservation, part of the Blackfoot Confederacy of Southern Alberta. She's a member of the Ghana First Nation and herself a survivor of the residential school system. Doreen and her family, including four granddaughters, make their home in Calgary, and they've been there since 1960. She works with the federal and provincial government and spent 15 years as an Indigenous relations consultant to the oil and gas industry. Today, she's establishing successful working relationships between Indigenous communities through her role with the Alberta Energy Regulator, where she is a resident elder. She's an honored member of the Traditional Knowledge Keepers, which is a group of elders across Canada that provide support, guidance, training for companies like ours and other organizations seeking advice and guidance. Doreen courageously shares her personal experience in life as a residential school, and doing so to help bring home the reality of the ongoing impacts and systemic racism for her audiences. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Doreen. Encourage you to bring forward any questions you might have for Doreen at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Doreen, to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I hope I was just chatting with Margot, and I wanted to I'll let you know ahead of time, there is no easy way or gentle way to tell our stories of residential schools. So sometimes some of the parts of my story, my experience is quite hard. So just a warning. And you'll see me shed some tears when I come to my story, how it affects my children. I still get emotional, and how it's affecting my grandchildren. That's when I shed tears, so please forgive me. So if we could, the slide, just a sec here. Okay, we're on the overview. I'll cover I'm just going to skim over the top of treaty signing, and because if you go into detail, it's a whole day session that we go way back in the beginning of the newcomers and up to the treaty. So there's a lot of information, but today I'm just going to cover a small bit of it and how it's affected and started this whole residential school, and how the Indian Act was put in place. And again, there's so much information in that, but I will cover just a small portion and how it's affected residential school and the reconciliation. And when it comes to residential school, I'll talk a bit about residential school, but then I'll go into my personal story of what I went through when I first went there. And then we'll go into intergenerational trauma, how it's affecting us still today. And today, what reconciliation is, and Orange Shirt Day, how we can participate and move forward together. And then just as an option, I always like to share something at the end of the session. And today I want to share how you can use the 7 sacred teachings, but it's not a prescription to take care of it all, everything. It's just their guiding principles. So we'll start with that. The next slide. I wanted to share a quick story on the picture. It's when this is for Treaty 7, when the government officials came to sign Treaty 7 with the Blackfoot Confederacy. The site is by Gleason. That's where the Siksika Reserve is, and it's at the Blackfoot Crossing. It's our people camped on the south side of the river, and the government officials were on the north side. And the government, after 3 days sitting there waiting for our people to come back, to come across to negotiate the treaty, for 3 days, they, according to the government officials, they said they were getting really angry. I wish these Indians would take it seriously that we want to negotiate this treaty, want to get this treaty signed. And all they're doing for the last 3 days, they've been just partying for every day and all night. But what they missed was that our people were holding ceremonies to make sure, because when we make major decisions, our people always think of the 7 generations to come. How is it going to affect all those 7 generations? So that was what they were doing. They were holding ceremonies so that they would make the right decision. So it was just an example of they didn't know who we were, and we didn't know who they were, and so we didn't come as equals. They came as the dominant worldview, and ours is the oral worldview, which when we come to work with someone, we always come as equals. We find the parallels and we create an ethical, safe space, and then we come together as equals. So next slide. That was just a little bit of tidbit of information. Anyways, for the treaties, when they were being signed, excuse me, the treaties were done because the Queen's hired men reported back to her that there were too many Indians, and if they went to war to forcibly take the land, that they would lose the war. So it was decided that peace treaties had to be signed with them to take the land. There are numbered treaties, a series of 11 treaties made between the Crown and First Nations between 1871 to 1921. And each treaty had a business case attached to it. First Nations, though our people thought they were signing a peace treaty to share the land with the newcomers, but the government officials had different ideas. Their intentions were that they were going to take the land away from our first peoples forever. And our people thought they were going to share the land with the newcomers at the depths of a plow, but that didn't happen. So the beginning of that, and that whole process was the beginning of colonization. The ink hadn't even dried on the treaty paper, and we were all rounded up and put on small pieces of land. Excuse me. That was the reservations they had set aside for all of us, and they were fenced. All the reserves were fenced around the land base, and in order for any of our people to leave or to go somewhere, we had to get a 48-hour pass. And if you didn't show up back at the reserve within those 48 hours, the RCMP, the mounted police would go and look for them. And when they were found, they would be they were given the option to pay $250 fine or jail term, 1 month in jail. None of us had $250 back in those days, so they always ended up in jail. And that was the treaties when they put us on the reserves. So much for the promise that at those treaty negotiations that we were told that our people were told that they could continue to live as they always did, to hunt, fish, gather for their livelihood on their traditional lands as they did before. And that also, they would also be showered with the benevolence of Her Majesty. So none of that. The peace treaty, they thought, or like I said, our people thought they were signing a peace treaty, but it didn't happen. And another act that was put in place to manage all the people that were put on reservations was the Indian Act. So next slide. And if you want to take a closer look to the treaties, you can just Google Treaty 6 or 7 or 8, and it'll show you the exact, the real document itself and the negotiations that happened. So the Indian Act is was the next step that was put in place. Now, while the treaties were being negotiated in the West, legislation was introduced in 1876, which would have deep and long-lasting impacts on our people across Canada. The Indian Act was a consolidation of regulations that impacted First Nations people living throughout the country. It was created to assimilate Indians into the mainstream society and contained policies to terminate the culture, social, and economic and political distinctiveness of our people. Ceremonies were outlawed. Also to deal with the administration of the First Nations on reservations, health, food, lodgings, etc. The main goal of the act was to force the First Nations people to lose their culture and become like Euro-Canadians. In 1927, the act made it illegal for First Nations people to continue and communities to hire lawyers or bring about land claims against the government without the government's consent. The Indian Act is still in operation today. They still govern all of the First Nations on reserves. We still can't do anything to make us self-sustaining. We are under the strict regulations of the Indian Affairs, and they use an envelope system to provide funding for the administration, to chief and councils for their administration of the reserves. So, and just as an example, if our reserves took money from one envelope to help another envelope system, like for example, if they took money from housing to help education or vice versa, that they were penalized, and the money that they took was forever taken from that envelope. So they made sure that we could not become self-sustaining. So still today, the minister has to give their consent on some major transactions. There has to be a vote within the First Nation that's trying to do something. And if they don't have a 50% vote, then the minister will not allow it. So again, if you want to learn more about the Indian Act, you can Google it, and there's so much information about it. So The worst part of the Indian Act was through subsequent amendments that required First Nations children to attend industrial or residential schools. And this was the beginning of assimilation, assimilating the children. So next, residential schools, like in Canada, the Indian residential school system was a network of boarding schools for Indigenous peoples. It was the federal government's way of taking the Indian out of the child, as we were considered savages, and that was how the government was going to assimilate us into the main society. Attendance was mandatory from 1894 to 1947. The network was funded by the Canadian government, Department of Indian Affairs, and administered by Christian churches. The school system was created to isolate Indigenous children from the influence of their own native culture and religion in order to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture. Over the course of the system, more than 100-year existence, around 150,000 children were placed in residential schools across Canada. And by the 1930s, about 30% of Indigenous children were believed to be attending residential schools. The number of school-related deaths remain unknown due to the incomplete records that nuns and priests kept. And I think a lot of the records also were destroyed. Estimates range from 3,200 to over 30,000. The schools were intentionally located at substantial distances from Indigenous communities to minimize contact between families and their children. The Indian Commissioner Hayter Reid argued for schools at greater distances to reduce family visits, which he thought counteracted efforts to assimilate Indigenous children. Parental visits were further restricted by the use of a pass system designed to confine Indigenous peoples to reserves. The last federally funded residential school was in Rankin Inlet that closed in 1997, and one in 96 was in Manitoba. The schools operated in every province and territory. The residential school system harmed Indigenous children significantly by removing them from their families, depriving us from our ancestral languages and exposing many of them to so much abuse. Students were also subjected to forced enfranchisement as assimilated citizens that removed their legal identity as Indians. Disconnected from their families and culture and forced to speak English. So next. That was just to give you an overview of how the residential school started and what it was set up for. So next is the story of my attendance in residential school. When I was, my older brother and I was 5 years old. I believe my brother might have been 6 or 7, I think 6. One morning, my mother got us all ready, our Sunday best clothes, and then she didn't tell us where we were going. Or she did tell us we were going to school, but she didn't say we were never coming home. She just said we would be going to school and these people would come and pick us up. Two men showed up at the door. One looked really weird, had a long black dress, and the other man was the Indian agent, and he looked normal. And we were taken to, when we arrived at the school, I was greeted by a nun, and again, she looked really scary, long habit. And my brother was taken, like the school faced east, and the boys section were on the north side and the girls were on the south side. And so a brother, or that's what they called them. If they were a priest, they were called a brother. Took my brother to their side of the north side, and the nun took me in and brought me up to the second floor of the school. And there were 3 tables outside a big playroom. And the first table, I was given a little dress and a slip and shoes and socks. And I was told to take my personal clothes and put those on. So, and all my personal clothing was put in this sack, and never saw them again. And then from that table, I went to the next nun, and she had this big book, and I was registered with my name, my full name, and then I was assigned a number, and my number was always in the 70s because I was so tiny. And so that day I was given the number 75. And that's how I was known from the time I was registered till the day I left. I wasn't referred to as my name, Doreen. I was just a number. And then the next day, table, I sat down and I was given a haircut, with bangs and just a little square haircut. And then they put grease in my hair, and that was to, apparently that was to kill any lice if I had any. They didn't want us to bring it into the school. And I was allowed to go into the playroom, and we had to stay. We stayed till about going on into the evening when all the other kids had showed up. And then we were all taken down to the basement, and all the girls were put together. And it was a huge room, cement floors, and just nothing but pipes. And I always ask people if they've seen Schindler's List, where the people were gassed. Well, that's what it looked like. But it was a steam bath they put us through, and it was cold water. And no, it was hot steam, and we were told to jump. And then they poured cold water, showered us with cold water, and given a bar of soap to wash the oil, the grease out of our hair. So it was a very scary first experience. And see that we can go to the next slide. I'll just quickly go through the routine at the school. First thing in the morning, 7 o'clock. It seemed earlier. We would kneel. Everything we did before we could do anything, we always had to stand, kneel down, and say a prayer. And so that's the first thing they had us do in the morning, was kneel down, say our prayer, and then line up for the bathroom. And then we were given a toothbrush and a powder that we used to brush our teeth, wash our face, use the bathroom. And when they gave us toilet paper, they just gave us 2 squares. So we had to be extremely careful when we needed to use it. My girlfriend that went to residential school also, when she tells her story, she always tells everyone, if you come to my house, I may not have any food in my cupboards, but you'll be guaranteed I have loads and loads of toilet paper. So she just makes a joke out of it. But anyways, all through the day, like I said, we have to pray before we did everything. So after we make our beds and get dressed and we line up, we all go down for breakfast. And waiting for us on the table is a tray with a bowl of cold porridge by now, and it's very lumpy, and a lump of brown sugar, which is really hard, and a glass of skim milk, which had separated by then, a slice of white bread, and was dried on one side because of it sitting on the tray for that length of time. And that was how we ate every morning. And we were always hungry, and we were always cold and scared. So those were the 3 fears that we always, the fear of being, getting into trouble, and we were always hungry, and we were always cold. Anyways, lunchtime, we would, again, there would be a glass of skim milk on our tray and a slice of bread. But we would take our plate, line up, and the nuns would be standing there with a metal pot, which had about 2 inches of water with macaroni and cheese floating on there. And that's what they would scoop and put on our plate. And a scoop of green peas. And we had that for lunch, and we also had that for dinner. And our food stayed really awful until, I'd say, about when I was about 10, 11, when they started to hire the women from the reserve to do the cleaning, housekeeping things at the school, helped in the kitchen. So that's when our meals got better, and we was such a welcome. In other schools, we were lucky we didn't get any experiments done on us. In other schools in northern Alberta, they did experiments on the children, how long a child would function without food. And the workers that were out in the barns in the farm area were begging the priests and the nuns, please feed these children. They're eating out of the pig's trough because they're so hungry. But they didn't listen to those guys. For medical, we had a nurse come once a month, and a dentist came once a month. And that was a horrible part. We had to line up and go up the stairs, and just around the corner was a storage area, but they had a dentist's chair in there, and that's where the dentist operated from. And we all had to line up and wait our turn. And they didn't freeze or fill our teeth. There was no maintenance. If we had a cavity, they would just extract it. And no freezing. And you could just hear the kids screaming of the pain when their teeth were being extracted. And you would just stand there praying that you didn't have any cavities. But unfortunately, I always had cavities. I only have 2, I only had 3 molars left by the time I left residential school. And they did experiment on us with TB tests, and a lot of the children disappeared after those. They put 6 scratches on our back, and that's where they injected us with TB. Luckily, a lot of us didn't. It didn't affect us, but some of the children disappeared. We didn't know where they went. They never came back. But apparently, they were sent to Edmonton to the Charles Camsell Hospital, and that's where all the people with TB were sent. We were taught by the nuns and priests. So when I left school, I was always asked if I was French because I had a French accent because of we were taught by and looked after by the nuns that all spoke French. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is the hard part. Those nuns, I always say, had to have taken a course in being mean, because they were so terribly mean to us. We were mentally, emotionally abused, physically and sexually. They always told us that we were savages, we were dirty, and that they were going to change all that. And if we were caught speaking Blackfoot, we were just little kids, and you get to playing, and you get carried away, and you start speaking Blackfoot. The nuns would stop everything, and they would take us into the front of the room. It was a little stage, and we were going to show us as an example that we were not supposed to speak Blackfoot, that we were only supposed to speak English. And they would give us the strap. It was a canvas strip, about 1.5 inches wide and about 1/4 inch thick. And they wouldn't stop giving you the strap on your hands until you cried. So the trick there was to cry after the first, actually start crying before you started. So you only got 1 strap. And we also got the strap if we were caught looking to the north side. The nuns always thought we were having dirty thoughts, looking to the boys' side. So we would get a strap for that. If we were caught holding hands when we're in a lineup, or we were playing, holding hands with your friend, again, we got a strap for that. Again, they thought we were having dirty thoughts. Everything was related to some dirty thought. That's how they operated. And emotionally, like they never taught us about love or to show affection, because we would get a strap for it. So I never knew what love was. I never knew how to show emotion except to cry. And that really affected my children when I had my children. Anyways, that covers the mental, all the abuses. And when it was bedtime, you'd think this was our escape from the living conditions at residential school and the abuses that we encountered. But it ended up, bedtime was the worst experience that we had, as when the nuns and the priests would come up to the dorm, And they would, I guess the nuns probably pre-selected which girls were going to be used to go with the priest for their sexual pleasures, because you could hear their footsteps going and waking up the girls to go with the priests. And oh, excuse me for a second. That's what I mean. I need to apologize. I get emotional when it comes to that. So that you could hear the girls crying as they were led out of the room. And every night you'd lay there praying that you're not the next one to be picked, to be taken to the priest. And also at night, the nuns would walk around and with their flashlight, and we were made to sleep with our hands under the pillow. And if she found our hands were not under the pillow, that were under the blanket, they were in the blanket, they would turn the light on and wake everybody up and tell them, they would explain that our hands were under the blanket. Again, they thought we were playing with ourselves, not thinking that maybe we were cold. Anyways, we'd get a strap for that. And today I have arthritis in my shoulders, and I still wake up and my hands are up. Got so used to sleeping like that. We can go to the next slide. Okay, from tragedy to triumph. This is the worst part of my story. I guess I should go back before I start this. I went to residential school, like I said, at 5, and it wasn't until we were about 12 years old when they started to relax the rules, and we were allowed to go home at Easter 1 week and 2 months in the summertime, and 1 week at Christmas time. And and I left residential school when I turned 14. Because I had, when I got to grade 9, they had, the school had built, the government had built a high school next to the residential school. And they had hired lay people as the teachers to come. And that was the first exposure that we had to other outside teachers that came to teach from grade 9 to grade 12. And I was in grade 11, and I was 14 years old, I was in grade 11. And I had I guess, a personality conflict with our homeroom teacher. And I was always being singled out when other kids were fooling around. And the other kids would just laugh at me, thinking, oh, they got away with everything. But after the 3rd time that happened, I just had enough. I have no idea where I got the courage, but I just got up. And just before I left, the teacher yelled at me. He said, if you go out that door, don't ever expect to come back again. And that's just, like I said, I don't know where I got the courage, but I looked at him and I said, I have no intentions of ever coming back. And I went to the principal, the school principal, and told him I was leaving. And he begged me to stay because I was an A student. He didn't want me to just quit school. And so he asked if I would consider him contacting Indian Affairs in Lethbridge so I could finish grade 11 and grade 12. And so I agreed. And so they arranged a boarding home for me in Lethbridge, and I finished my high school, grade 11 and 12. And I also stayed with the same family who were really kind and really good to me when I went to the college and got my administrative training. I but then applied for a job at the Blood Tribe and didn't get it. And I have no idea why I decided I wanted to go to Calgary. I was 17 years old, and I went to Indian Affairs and I told them what I wanted to do to find a job. And they had a program, employment and relocation, to help me go to Calgary, make contact with the Indian Affairs office there. And they already knew I was coming, and they helped me find a place. And I went to Manpower, got 3 referrals, and I got a job right away, the first referral. And so Indian Affairs helped me find a place to live, a little basement suite, bus pass, and food for a month. And then I've been here ever since, and that was in the mid-60s. So when we talk about legacy of intergenerational trauma, the legacy of the school system has been linked to an increased prevalence of post-traumatic stress, alcoholism, substance abuse, and suicide for our people, and which persists within Indigenous communities still today. The survivors believed being cruel, using physical abuse as the norm, because that's all we saw, and we were at the receiving end of all those abuses as we were growing up. And so as grown-ups, we thought this was normal. And this, unfortunately, the adults carried on into their lives. And they became the abusers. So the abusers were, like the nuns were our mentors. So we didn't know any better. In 2021, over 1,000 unmarked graves were discovered on the grounds of former residential schools, which we heard about the one in Kamloops. And finding these graves of children reopened wounds of all residential school survivors across Canada, not just the ones in the area that they were found. It affected me a lot. Brought to the surface all the hurts and the anger that I had thought I buried after doing all these stories, sharing my stories. But I learned I needed to deal with those the anger and the hurts, because I didn't realize I was still carrying those around. Oh, our people are still living with the trauma of residential schools today. And that's why you see a lot of our people that are on the streets, drunk. And alcohol was the only escape that they had to get out of the hurt, the anger, and now today there's drugs that they now go use. And so sometimes our people try to leave the reserve, because there's no jobs on the reserves. So they come to the city thinking they'll get a job and change their lives. But when they get here, all they get is doors being shut in their face, when they go for social services, the people who meet them first ask them, where are you from? Because they see the different color in their skin. And the person says, I'm from such and such a band. And they're told, you have to go back to where you came from. We can't help you. You're a federal responsibility. We only take care of people. We're a provincial government. So they end up not being able to get anywhere in the city. And that's why you see them on the streets. And give me a sec here. Anyways, that's what I just wanted to explain, like how it's still affecting us today. You also hear of the different conditions that on reserves, that all the alcoholism, drug abuse, and you hear about the children, young 9-year-olds that are committing suicide, and it's because they just get enough of the abuses that they get from their parents, older brothers and sisters, that they have nowhere to run. And the only way they can escape that is to commit suicide. So anyways, with reconciliation and moving forward, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established to uncover the truth about the schools. The commission gathered about 7,000 statements from residential school survivors through public and private meetings at various local and regional and national events across Canada. Between 2008 and 2013, which they documented all the stories that the experience of former students of residential schools. And in 2015, the TRC, the commission, concluded with the establishment of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and the publication of a multi-volume report detailing the testimonies of survivors and historical documents from the time. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you the next. The report concluded that the school system amounted to cultural genocide. Residential schools are a known fact by many Canadians. And through the work of many initiatives, and especially the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, the reality of those tragedies is coming more and more into focus. Now is a time to move forward from this darkness into light. For all Canadians, find a way to leave the past behind and create forgiveness and cultural respect for all of us, for our future. Canadians can create a new legacy for children of all nations and cultures by joining hands in an open process of dialogue and truth-telling, of reconciliation. The Commission estimates that 80,000 survivors of residential schools live in all regions of Canada today, and many other faiths and cultures have suffered in our borders too, and outside our borders too. Canadians need to hear our stories and find ways. Find ways to ensure our collective future rests on a solid foundation of respect, openness, and trust. For the sake of our children and future generations, we can build a stronger Canada, but we need to do it together. And in order to do that, we need to, people need to know, hear more about our history, what we've gone through, what residential school put us through. They need to hear all about the colonization that happened to us. And once through education, then we can start working and seeing us as equals, like we're human beings too. And so we can have a chance for our next generations can have a chance. But it's going to take generations before we break this cycle. So Orange Shirt Day, the next Orange Shirt Day and Truth and Reconciliation Day. What can we do? It's imperative to educate the children in schools, which in turn will give young Indigenous children an equal opportunity to attend public schools without encountering bullying and discrimination. This gives them a chance to a better future like all other young Canadians. To also educate on the history of Indigenous peoples, educate your children at home, and understand the cultures and traditions of Indigenous people. Understanding and using some of their cultural values, for example, making decisions based on how it will affect 7 future generations. Walk softly on Mother Earth and treat each other with respect and honesty. Also, this is why I wanted to, the next slide, this is why I wanted to introduce the 7 sacred teachings that we use as guiding principles. It's not a prescription of any kind, just as I stated before. It's to use it as a guiding principle. If one of the animals resonates with you, use it to guide you for the day. And you don't have to stick to one animal. So the reason why I bring up the 7 sacred teachings is that like times are really difficult and uncertain today. Our people, and all these children that are being discovered, like I said, it affected everyone. With others, jobs that were lost, small businesses that were lost, and the list can go on because of COVID. It's these times that we need to take care of our personal needs, such as health, mental, and emotional. We've been in isolation for over a year through COVID, and our stress, everyone's stress levels are high. So with introducing this is when I like to introduce the 7 sacred teachings that our Indigenous people use as guiding principles to help us navigate through these hard times. I'll read our guiding principle. Like many Aboriginal organizations and communities have adopted the 7 guiding principles in one form or another as a normal stepping stone and cultural foundation. Each community has adapted the teachings to suit their community values. They share the same concepts of abiding by a moral respect for all living things. Each sacred teaching is represented by an animal. The animals are, for love, is the gift from the eagle. With love, all things are possible. The Creator gave us a way to experience love and enjoy love through our children. Respect is the gift from the buffalo. Respect oneself and respect will be bestowed. Treat your body with respect and it will look after you. Courage, the bear carries courage. He brings spiritual healing to deal with anger, pain, and ourselves. Honesty is carried by the Sabi, the Sasquatch. In reality, there is no ifs or buts. There can only be honesty if one is to survive. The beaver carries wisdom. Wisdom is the gained experience to accept responsibility and accountability. The wolf carries humility. We need to understand humility. In our individual lives, humility becomes the factor which allows us to ask for guidance humbly. The turtle carries truth. Since the beginning of time, the turtle has not changed. It has been able to adapt to change without changing. Like I said, these are the 7 animals that represent each of the 7 guiding principles. These are just, like I said, it's just suggestions. It's not a prescription. So I hope my story will give you a better understanding as to what we went through and why our people on reserves are still in those, in such terrible conditions and through abuse of alcohol and drugs today. So I tell my story not to upset people or to sometimes people get really angry, and I tell them I don't want to make you angry or to feel sorry for us. Just show compassion when you see our people on the streets drinking or drunk. And so that when you're going to deal with them on a personal or business level, be more understanding and come to work together as equals, not as the dominant society. So thank you so much for listening to me, and it was such an honor to be asked to share my story with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. We are going to allow for a Q&A period right now. So I'm just going to give you some instructions on how the Q&A will work. This is going to be a live Q&A. So if you have any questions for Doreen or the members of the Indigenous Relations Committee who are on the call with us, please raise your hand using the hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. I will then call on you to unmute to ask your question in the order that the hands were raised. Once your question has been answered or you no longer wish to ask it, please lower your hand so that you are no longer in the queue. We will try to get to all the questions, but should we run out of time, we will provide instructions on where to send additional questions. I'd now like to ask all the panelists to please turn on their cameras.
My apologies for going over.
At all.
So if there are any questions for anyone on the call, please go ahead and raise your hand. Oh, I see there's one raised hand. It's Kelly Osterman. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Doreen. That was good. You showed an unbelievable amount of courage and the sacred teachings in that talk, and I really appreciate it. Anyway, question, and it might be more for the Matrix team, but we do a lot of work with First Nations, and I'm wondering how can we it's in our day-to-day lives. I think with the sharing of knowledge, it provides more understanding. It gives, it allows us to be more compassionate. I'm just wondering if there's things that we can do to support people, maybe in their personal lives too, like not just in our working relationships, but in our personal lives, to continue, improving our understanding, giving us tools to have that compassion, and so that we can move forward, right? Because I do think that's a really important aspect. So yeah, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, so I'm probably not making a lot of sense, but I'd like to see some momentum. I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call that are feeling a lot of emotion right now, and it's the kind of thing that, Matrix has done a fantastic job on our mental health initiative. So to me, this would be the same sort of thing, is that we talk about it and we're open to it. So to me, I'm wondering if we could have the same sort of a momentum that we've taken on with our mental health, with our Indigenous relations, and how can we measure that, and how are we improving on it? So anyway, that's it.
Did somebody else want to say something first? For Matrix?
Yeah, sure. I could say something. I think that's a great idea, Kelly. I think the thing I heard you say there is how can our committee do more to provide people with more information, not just from a Matrix perspective, but also for their personal lives. And I do think that's something we as the committee can take away and discuss and come up with some more material and information, maybe to read and help us with some of that.
Yes.
To provide everyone with more information if they're interested on a more personal level too. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think like what I hear from that question or the statement, and one that I agree with wholeheartedly, is that this is not a single day that we take to make advancements on this awareness and understanding, and that it's a good way to kind of center around, but it's an ongoing effort, and it can't just be something that we take kind of passively. I think there needs to be a very active approach to continue with this awareness and improvement on our business, on the business side of this issue.
You took my response, Blake.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. Anybody else before I jump in?
You go ahead, Tori.
Okay. I'm just going to give you an example, like what Blake said. I hope it's not just one day out of the year or 2 days, because if back in June, we have the Indigenous Day. So I would really hope it's not just today we do all this different activities on reconciliation, remembering the residential school survivors. Like, it should go on. And also the land acknowledgements, it comes from the heart. You do it at the beginning of your meetings or any events that you're going to have. So it's ongoing. What I'm trying to, what I've started at AER is I've started a elders circle, and we have an elder from each of the treaty areas, and 2 from Treaty 8, one from the east and one from the west. And we just started meeting, and what we're asking is direction from these elders as to how we can do a better job working with Indigenous communities when it comes to oil and gas development, and to give us that advice and guidance. And so those are things like that if you want to try something, but that's on a larger scale. personally, on an individual basis, share my story with your families and friends, to educate people on what we've gone through. And also maybe consider, which I had already mentioned to Blake, that I also do a full day session with B. Shattuck, Center of the Sky is her company. And we do a full day and we go into more detail about the history and the residential school, and then moving forward into more detail. So stuff like that, sharing the story, showing compassion, but continue your education personally. There's so many courses out there, videos that you can watch. So I can help you guys with that part. Well, I think that's.
Well, we do have a couple of more questions on from people. So next up is Guled Koshin. Go ahead, Guled.
Hi, Doreen and everyone. My name is Guled Koshin, and I'm a little bit have a different background than most of the people. I'm originally from Africa, came to Canada in 1986. And where I came from was not that good. And I was really fascinated and amazed how wonderful Canada was and how we were treated and all the opportunities we were given. 30 years later, I learned quite a bit about the Native situation, and I was horrified and shocked. So I see two Canada, one for the Natives and what they went through. My question is, all those things that you mentioned that the Native people endured, I am sure they were saying something all the time, but no one was listening. And my worry is, and I have kids now, and I'm non-native, so I'm part of the other side of the table. How can we listen rather than thinking that we can bring a solution for the Native situation? How can we listen? Whether it's land, whether it's culture, the language you lost, everything that they lost, how can we listen and say the solution can come from them, not us? And how can we stop every generation looking back and feeling terrible what our parents and great-grandparents did? How can we stop this and start to listening the Native people and getting directions from them how to resolve the situation or better their condition?
Well, for first part, when you said you're on the other side of the table, how about moving to the same side of the table with the Indigenous people? We're all human beings. We don't want to carry on a grudge or be angry. But some of our young people, unfortunately, are very angry of what we've been put through. And that's why our elders we need to have a place where we can gather to help these young people so that they find their true identity, because they're lost between the oral and the Indigenous, the main society and the Indigenous. They don't know their culture, they don't know our ceremonies. And treat each other with respect and honesty, and work together. Learn about the history about our people, what we've gone through, and talk to elders. They're the ones that have all the information. Our leader of the Knowledge Keepers, Dr. Reg Koshu, in one of his presentations, he referred to all of us elders as filing cabinets, because our oral worldview is nothing's written. Everything's passed through stories, and in the Western worldview, all your information is documented, videotape, everything. But when some of our stories are now being recorded by non-native people, we're losing our elders, really. They're dying off. And so we need to get our stories out there. And so I would recommend, if you want to learn more about how you can help our people, get to know them, make friends. When you've made a good friend, when they start teasing you, that means they like you. So make friends with the Native people. I hope I answered your question, and my mind is now getting jumping all over the place. If there are questions and you didn't feel I answered, maybe Margot, they could send them to you, and then I could respond back. I would love to do that. I see it's 20 after, and I've got another meeting I have to run to. I'll take the next one question.
You'll take one more?
Yeah.
Okay, there's one more from Patricia Brost. You can go ahead, Patricia.
Morning, Doreen.
Morning.
Patricia Brost. I was born and raised in Southern Alberta, and I'm in my late 40s. And about 6 years ago, I first learned about residential schools, which is terrible. I've asked my parents if they knew about them. They would have been going to school around the same time as you. My dad in Saskatchewan, my mom in Southern Alberta, never heard about residential schools. It's a travesty that many of us didn't know. There's a lot of true ignorance. Up until today, I didn't know some of these details that you shared about how the treaties were established, about the Indian Act, and about residential schools and how you were treated. It must be so difficult to share your story, and I just really want to thank you today for doing that. And it was really nice meeting you. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that. Thanks, Doreen.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot.
We do have a few more comments, and there is one more question, but if you're out of time, we will be sending out some information afterwards on how people can send in their questions, and we can provide them to Doreen. And I will also provide you some of the comments that are in the chat so that you can hear some of the nice things people had to say. So I will turn it. Oh, you're welcome. I'll turn it to Matthew to just do a final thank you.
Yeah. So I'm a little choked up myself here. There's really no words to convey on behalf of Matrix our level of appreciation for your courage. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say our sorrow for the suffering that you and your people have endured.
Mhm.
As a company, Matrix is committed to the environment, air, water, soil.
Yeah.
And our work with Indigenous communities will continue. I've had the opportunity to participate in 2 blanket ceremonies with Indigenous communities in Canada, signing joint ventures to work on oil and gas and mining related projects. And I guess for me, that experience, I learned more in terms of how we need to operate with Indigenous communities, because you teach us.
Yeah.
So I also want to thank the Indigenous Relations Committee at Matrix. I'm really proud to be part of this organization, and yeah, we'll keep doing the right thing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. If you want to call on me to help in other areas, I'd be more than happy to. We have an Indigenous decision-making process. I'd love to share with you guys.
We'll take you up on that. We'd like that. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone that was listening. And like I said, all I ask is show compassion for our people and make friends. Thank you, but I gotta run.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.